Jan, I think you have the first agenda item. If you're here.
I don't know if he's here yet.
Cool. Let's see here. I guess we could skip to the Alexandra. If you have the second item, we can circle back to the first.
Okay. Yeah, so it's in regard to adding custom issue types. I was thinking, where should we define it? Should we define it at project or group level, or the top group level, actually, to kind of propagate that to the entire organizational hierarchy? Because then different questions are being raised in terms of duplicating the same types across groups or across projects and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, I responded to that initially. And I think long-term goal, or short-term, if it's even possible, with merging groups and projects together, is we want to get groups or issues at the group level as soon as like practically possible, without like duplicating the feature, just so we don't have to like manage two different things. So I would also say that putting it at the group level is where we should go. And then eventually the same thing that's going to back a group in a project will also back a workspace. So we would have it at the workspace, which would wrap all top level groups. So it could be defined there, which is, if we put it at the group level, I think it would make it easier to support that later on.
Does it make sense to have it at the top group level, or any group level?
I think any group level, starting at the top. I would think there's a managed access, and I linked to this. They're working on a proof of concept right now for like standardizing the behavior of cascading settings from workspaces all the way to groups to subgroups and subprojects down. I think we should coordinate with them. Drew Blessing is the one assigned to it. But this is like sort of the common behavior where we don't have a standardized inheritance model for how things do flow downstream. And I think like, I'm not sure what the final UX is going to be, but I would assume that if I have issue types defined at my highest level group, at the lowest level group, if I want to add another type, maybe I could do that. Maybe there's also a desire to like basically, from a compliance standpoint, prevent people from mucking up the issue types downstream that don't have access to it. And so eventually I think it will be an optional thing where the top level group would define it. If other subgroups are allowed to change it or add to it, basically, or disable certain types and have more control like downstream, it would be like a toggle that would enable them to do that from a permission standpoint. And then for the compliance minded organizations that don't want anybody to like muck with things downstream, they wouldn't be able to do that. And I think we're trying to figure out right now across all of Create, basically, what does that look like in the standardized behavior pattern that we can replicate across all of our different features.
But until we solve that, is it fair to start at the top group level, right? That will kind of solve our situation here, so that we can do an MVC and still not make our lives difficult, so to say.
Yeah, as an MVC, I think it's great to start at the top group level. The thing that is that I guess Sid basically said no to like a DAG based thing for sharing resources across groups, but like there's also the proposal to be able to assign an issue to multiple like sibling groups, so to speak. And so just thinking through the implications of if we are able to pull that off, what does that mean for types, issue types? If two top level groups have the same issue type, can we basically infer that they're the same thing and like reference in that way? Just thinking through some of those implications across top level groups, I think is worth doing at the onset. But as an MVC standpoint, starting with just the top level groups, great.
Cool, thanks.
Jan, you're here. If you want to, we can circle back to 3A.
Yeah. Hi, sorry, I joined it a little bit later and I didn't expect this will be first on the agenda. Yeah, so I'm just catching up and reading through the comments. Yeah, but thank you for paying attention to me. The purpose is just to draw more attention, to make sure that everybody is aware of the implications of this change, because I'm not sure if everybody understands that then all issue types will be listed, will be treated and listed as any other issues. So we can have a separate view or page for them, but they will also be included wherever we list other types of issues. So from user point of view, this might be a biggest change regarding this conversion. But yeah, so I just want to make sure that everybody understands this and everybody is on the same page if we go down this road. It would be quite bad to try to separate them later on all levels of code base and try to do separation later because we have it on many places.
Alexander, do you want to verbalize your next point?
Yeah, like, and I think from the backend perspective, we're kind of in agreement that we can use the same underlying object for a lot of these things, requirements, incidents, and so on and so forth. And like my understanding, and I'm certainly in agreement with the fact that the UI and the UX should kind of separate different types of, or different sets of issue types. I can see how some customers would not want to combine together different sets of issue types, like they want to keep together like separate, totally separate, say, requirements, test cases, and all that, like regulatory stuff, and then have what's related to development as a different set of issue types and different views and different like auto completion and all that stuff. So from UI perspective, I think that does make sense, and there might be some confusion if we start to mingle everything together. Again, from the backend perspective, I think it makes sense to have it as a single object, and it will, just because a lot of the functionality is the same, the filtering, the like being able to assign to a milestone assignees and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's something that to consider and to think about, and probably to kind of I suggested that maybe we should consider adding yet another abstraction level at the issue type level, sort of think how that will play out. But yeah.
I had the next point. I think we can keep dedicated views for certain types of issues if desired. So it's just like it's like a filtered down list. So for example, incidents have their own list view that you can find within the UI, but they show up in the issue list, which I think is fine, right? And I think that's fine because the like ultimately we're going to add filtering by issue type. And if we have OR filtering, so basically I can filter just to the types of issues that I want. And then we're going to have saved filters and searches. So basically in these different views, I can create my filter and then like basically save my view. So every time I go back, it's the same thing as creating a bookmark, but it's going to be like a better experience in the product. So like I only see the things that I want, right? So I can build my own kind of customized views.
Yes, right. And I agree with this. And I think that if we are all in agreement regarding this, that we can have separate view for them, but they will also be on issue page, then that's fine. But this is, I don't agree, or I'm not sure about we can do this only on backend side and have separate views, as Alexandru mentioned, because it implies to do many additional checks or filtering on backend side, because there are many places where we check just for projects issues without checking issue type or something similar. Yeah. So if we commit to convert some resource to issue type, it should also mean that we treat it as any other type of issue. Yeah.
In the front end, could that like if you want to have a requirements only list, couldn't the front end just pass in a request to the API and basically say only give me types of issues that are requirements?
Yes, there is no problem to do this. It's completely fine. But yeah, there might be some other scenarios like exporting of some issue type or some drop downs or referencing of other issue type and stuff like this. So if we want to separate some issue type, it would be hard to do this on all these levels.
Yeah, I think the only thing, and this is like the last one I had, is the reference problem is the only thing that I see that's really would be tricky to solve with types of issues, right? Because we like have a new flexible like syntax for you can basically define the key and then match on the ID of the thing instead of using a symbol since we're running out of those. And to me, it's like the tricky part is going to be preventing the issue type from being named certain things like custom issue types. They would conflict with system defaults. So like almost have reserved type words, like test case, for example, is going to be a system default. Incident is going to be a system default. But then when you reference them, if you were to change the issue type, which is something we want to support, I would expect it also would change the reference filter to point to the correct issue type. If that makes sense. So that's like the big out of all the stuff I feel like we've talked about, that's the most tricky thing in my mind.
Yeah, that's not an easy thing because that's referenced in text. So you basically would need to kind of search all the text references and do the update, so to say. I'm not sure that's viable thing. One way to solve is like to be able to filter them down somewhat by a specific reference, but when you reference it, just use the generalized issue reference and it will point, because it's an issue object, it will point to the correct object, but the reference itself will be like general and I will not tell you specifically what kind of object that is, although that's doable as well when you parse it and make it a HTML and so on.
I think that would work. So, because we want to make those like references have more rich data anyways. So just like how we show closed, when an issue is closed, when it's referenced, it's a similar type thing where we could just like expose maybe like the issue type is an icon or something. And the status, eventually we'll have status, to the right of it as well, but just use the generic reference syntax, which I'm fine with as well. I think we can sort that out.
Yeah, I think that the generic reference syntax would be more feasible because we cannot backward change reference type. It's not possible to go through all system nodes and check where we reference it. So it would be better to use one type of reference and do just very lightweight flavoring or adding a type on the fly when we render it to user. But that would be all we can do, I guess.
Can you all like take one step back and I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. What does separating on the back end mean to you? Like, could you explain that? I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah. So now, for example, resources like requirements and issues are separated because both use separate table. And if anywhere in the code I ask for example, projects issues, I get only issues. I don't get requirements. Or if I export some issues to user or list them in API, I get only issues. If we convert requirements to issue type, it means that if I ask for issues, I get issues, but now also requirements because these will be issues too, just a different type. And by separation, I mean that we would have to go through the all code base, and where we don't want to get some issue type like requirements, we would have to do we would have to add a specific filter, to ignore them in these listings. and there may be quite many places where this customization would be required. And if we want to do this separation, then my question would be if it's really so beneficial to do this issue type conversion, because we would have to implement separate API and additional layers too. So I wouldn't be so sure that we want to do this issue type conversion then.
And with the issue types, we are like kind of erasing any link to the type on the back end. So there's like no reference to it anymore, is the proposal. Well, at the moment, I suppose.
Link to what?
So if it's a requirement, for example, is there reference at all to the fact that it's a requirement issue type in the backend, or?
Yeah, on backend side, if it's a requirement, we will just store it as issue, but store the type, store the information that it's type of requirement. Yeah. So
that makes sense.
So you can
Yeah.
still query the APIs to basically say, give me a list of all the issues that are type requirement, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact is also, well, not to say that the biggest, but the big impact is that the sort of the backward compatibility with what user may see now can be affected, because they may see things in places where they would not expect them to be there, because the requirements are so separate right now from the issues and incidents and all that stuff. When you combine them, you might see these requirements pop up in places where issues pop up, and you might not expect that, right? Because you're not used to this kind of combining all of these types.
yes.
We're going to have
This
to be really clear when we go ahead and do this, because there are a few organizations out there that are using requirements that have thousands of requirements and very few issues. And I think it's going to really muddy the waters for them if they suddenly have, let's say, 30 open issues, and then there's 1,000 requirements that show up in that list interspersed. So again, I put a note here. I don't really mind doing this up front, but I guess I just want to understand when we're going to have that filtering in place, and if there's going to be a way to like default those to not show. I think that's going to be a fast follow that's going to be requested by a lot of the users. But again, I think we need to make progress here, and I think we need to not be afraid to make this change, because it's going to open the door to a lot of other things for us.
Yeah, I agree. And this is exactly, yeah, I'm on the same page with you. I just want to make sure that everybody understands these implications. Yeah. So.
No, thanks for bringing it up. I mean, it's important for us to think through. Is there an issue, by the way, like talking about this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, or in the epic, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, these issues are linked from the comment I put to the note. So I would really appreciate your expertise and UX point of view about this change, and I think that UX approval would be needed for going forward with it too. So thanks.
Awesome. Will do.
Kristen, I think you had the next point.
Yeah, so I'll just, I'm really on board with this change and like getting onto a primitive of some sort. I do think requirements would be the right object to go first, and just thinking through it, because epics would have so much more migration, we probably should have another object go first, and then maybe potentially try something like initiatives, which would be similar to epics for our team, so we could test the waters and then merge epics after that. Of course, that's just my high level thoughts. So I'm open to any thoughts on how we would progress towards moving those other types onto the primitives. And I also just wanted to mention that we should think about, just like we're thinking about these databases, APIs, everything, we should also think about tracking out of the box, so we get that for free. We've been doing a lot of one-offs in terms of getting our Gmails and everything, but if we have issue types, there should be a way we should be able to scale those with each new type that would get us detailed tracking objects as well coming out of the system. So I don't know if anyone's thought of that part of it yet, but I'd love to get ahead of that, so that we just, when we have new objects on a board or any other view, that we would just get the tracking for free.
That is something we'll have to work through, Jan, in the issue, because right now we're tracking number of requirements created. We need to figure out how to keep that metric as we transition them to issue types. Because right now I think that means they'll all lump into Gabe's issues created metric, which isn't a horrible thing, but it does pretty much take out my primary
Yeah.
for what we're
We'll
tracking.
just keep giving it all to Gabe.
Well,
No,
again,
Yeah.
no.
We need a way to cut out for sure, and for our customers too.
yeah, I mean it's stage level. I'm glad to see that it will increase things. I mean that's great. I just want to make sure
Yeah.
I understand that requirements, the utilization is there. So that's something we'll just have to work through as we go forward.
I think we can probably adjust the code that tracks things based on activity, based on type, and then still aggregate it into one MAU metric, which would be our stage level MAU metric.
Mhm.
And then each group would have one and basically like would be the filtered subset of those. So I think it's something to sort out as well, but it also should theoretically make instrumentation easier because we only have to do it once. And the other thing that is beneficial is that from a compliance standpoint, now like the compliance team basically only has to integrate with one object instead of like add compliance for epics, add compliance for issues, add compliance requirements for all these different things. So it basically gives them a single object to do all their compliance needs with, which I think is great.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this because again, if done correctly, the roll up should actually be much easier from a metrics collection standpoint because all we'd be doing is saying, hey, we have an issue of this type. And then you can say how many issues do we have total, and that's the group level thing that will include epics and issues and test cases and requirements, and it'll all be rolled up easily. And then for each of those subsets, it would be very easy at that point then to just filter out the, like for me, I would just filter out epics and issues and I would get test cases and requirements for free. And I think that's a much cleaner perspective because right now the overlap is really hard.
Yep.
So overall, again, very good change. There just might be some growing pains in the meantime, and that's okay.
Yep. I think we covered 4, and John, you have 5.
Yeah, just a quick one. Charlie's been really helpful and proactive in kind of surfacing refactorings on the back end that we might benefit from as a result of doing the work on Epic boards. If we're 100% committed to issue types, then that unblocks some of the conversation that we're having here. Basically, like if there's never going to be a different type of board other than one that renders different issue types, then I think we don't have to do any refactoring. Because I think it's redundant to have a prefix like issue board if we're never going to have a different type of board. So I guess like any of the engineers on the call, like, do you see this architecturally being the way we should do it, where we have one board type that renders any mixture or single filtered issue type?
Yeah, it makes sense to me, but there is quite a bit of way to get epics into issue types, I would think. Requirements are somewhat simpler from my perspective, just because they don't have this inheritance thing. And this inheritance thing within the epics is something that will make epic migration to issue type somewhat more, well, it's not problematic. We'll need to either add support for the inheritance within the issues or somehow migrate the epics into out of the parent-child structure into some linkage sort of thing that we have within the issue. So that generally it does make sense to me, but there is some time to get to the epic board, so to say, not specifically for types, because the types is somewhat easy, right? You just filter by the field, but the epic specific type of boards, or should I say the type of boards where you have this inheritance stuff is where the problem is, I think.
I think I've added to that under point 3 under Christian's point about this. Like customers, the way they think about this already is they think about their issue types in a hierarchy. They just want to be able to define what that is. So like we could solve this by adding types to epics, right? And allowing them to define their types for their different within their hierarchy. And then once they do that, we could basically convert those types over to issue types and those issues over to issues with the definable relationship. But really what they want to be able to do, whether it's through a hierarchy or through the linkage, is do the roll up, be able to define what the roll up looks like by issue type. And so like it basically can map it to their business domain and how they have their business domain organized in terms of like their planning objects. So I think once we at least sort of support that level of linkage or customizable linkage or relationships, then it's easier to like allow them to create what that looks like, and then basically click a button to migrate the epics that have these different levels into that other kind of hierarchy that they define from the relationship standpoint. Like we can sort through it. It's going to be a little bit tricky, I think, for sure, but we want to add that customizable like relationship level anyways. So I think we do that at the same time.
Yeah, I would also expect that we will need one board for all issue types, but I can imagine that we may need some other than issue type resources which might need a board in future. And for this reason, I would expect that we have issue type board, and in future we can add, if we need, we can add other types of boards, same as we did with Epic board. For me, having a board called just board seems to be quite generic, but yeah, I agree with you that if we would ultimately end up just with issue type boards, we might not need this rename. But it might be more specific to rename it to issue type board.
I just had a point because I don't know if MRs are ever going to convert to a type of issue. Maybe, I'm not sure. There's also a future case where I would like to see basically like my issues, but like grouped by merge requests. So, or merge request group by issue. So I could like basically have swim lanes for my each issue that shows the merge requests in different statuses or whatever. So there is a point where we're going to want to probably somehow mix resources on a board and like not like in some sort of strategic way. There's also the use case where I think vulnerabilities is using the issuable class, which is, for those listening, there's issuable, and then on top of that is issue, and which is where we're talking about issue type, and merge requests and Epic share the issuable stuff along with vulnerabilities right now, I believe. And I know that they wanted boards as well. So I don't know how that complicates stuff. If we do the refactor and name it issue boards, that'd be fine. I would almost like think about based on the issuable types, which issue is one of them. But I would totally leave that up to the engineers. I think for y'all to call.
Gabe, like as we're talking about that, random thought, are we changing the name issuable or issue at any point, or has there been thinking there?
We would change the name. Issuable is in the code only, so it's not user facing. It's basically like a class that has behaviors defined that are common across things that use them, like merge requests and issues. In terms of calling issue something different, I'm open to that. What I think will eventually happen is we'll basically reference types instead of issues specifically, if that makes sense. So like when I go into Jira and I create a new issue, there might be one button that says create issue, but like I basically select the type. When I want to view it on the board, I'm viewing it by type, and I call it a feature or a bug or something else. And so I would assume that eventually like the UI will not just be like issues. It'll be, hey, I want to view my features or view my whatever things. But I think changing issues though, like is the base thing, would be really hard too, because our APIs are named issues. Like everything is named issues in the code. So, but we can do whatever we want, like in the UI, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. I think maybe it's like you said, the issue types, maybe thinking further into that because it gets a little confusing. Even to me, I'm like, been calling them work items instead. But
Yeah.
Alexis, I had that same question this week too. And maybe we could even do like just a lightweight diagram of how issuables stacks up compared to issue type. But it's really just those like assignee and labels. There's like 3 or 4 fields, which is issuable, and it's just on MRs, issues everywhere. It took me a while to grok it too.
yeah, that makes sense. We could dig into all the little, it's same issue I had with like iteration, milestone, and like what are those, like time box or kit, like what so anyway, not to get into that wormhole. Sounds good. Let's think further into it.
Yeah, there's like the basing. So there is like a time box, I think maybe a class now we call it. And then sort of the way it works in object-oriented programming is you have like the base shared abstraction down below in the code, and then each like merge request or let's say milestone iteration inherits basically the things from its class, parent class, so to speak. and then like merges that in. So in terms of what we do, like in the UI, I think that you should feel complete freedom to explore whatever you want. And then like that shouldn't have much impact on what we do from a code standpoint, I wouldn't think, with this change. Engineers are definitely say if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think it's our engineers' issue that we caused this confusion to some extent, because issuable used to be just backend specific name for this abstraction of sharing the logic across the resources, but it was purely on code base level. It was not user facing term which we would present outside. So I guess here the confusion was introduced that we use this term related to issue types, but it's purely backend specific term. So sorry for that.
It's too good of a name, so it catches up.
Silly.
Cool. If there's nothing else on that, I think Natalia, you have item 3C.
Yes, it's like very short demo, and I finished like 5 minutes before the call. So if something goes wrong, forgive me. So it's basically like with assignees, we are refactoring confidentiality to be a widget. And part of this functionality is also adding a shared state. So currently our sidebar is connected to the same Apollo client, and it has the global state now. And UX is not changing that much. I'm sorry, Alexis, for the UX changes on assignees. This one is much simpler. So when we turn it on here, we have a sync up, but I've added one more thing to this functionality. So this is a standalone widget like assignees now. No connections to Vuex store. It's absolutely standalone one, but we can do this now. So previously there were no updates to the sidebar. Right now it takes some time still, but sidebar is updated as well as confidential UX state. Because our Apollo client now is synchronized also to the Vuex store of the Notes application with a subscription. And I believe this will be a good update for our sidebar interactivity. So that's it. It was like a really short one, but hopefully a good progress on the front-end side. And on to Kristen.
Thanks, Natalia. That was cool. I just put a note in workflow here. This is an MR showing how you talk about a feature in the release post if it's not ready to go or it's behind a feature flag. So we're doing this right now with our MVC1 of Epic boards. I've been trying to work with the wording and get it right to let our customers know that it's not fully going to be there for them. So we just need to add more information about being a beta tester, how to turn things on with feature flags and be really clear that it's not good to go. And so it's cool. Another team was also having this problem at the same time. So they actually rolled out an MR just to clarify how to do that.
Yeah, this one is interesting too, because there's not a whole lot to do yet, right, on Epic boards. So
Just
like,
view.
how do you signal that, like, cool, like now you could actually do something also? Like, did we do something like that?
I think, yeah, we're gonna do updates. So the next release post will be saying more what you can do with it. And again, how to enable or disable the feature flags. So if the first one's gonna be, you can really just see it, it's static of you. Then you'll be able to add and edit. And the goal will be more people trying it in beta and just, it's not official yet, but it's mostly for one of our bigger customers who's really excited to turn this on as soon as possible and just have a visual on all of their epics.
No, that's awesome. Do they just kind of follow along in the issues to know when they could start doing things, or do we signal in any other way?
the TAMs are pretty active in the internal channels with us. So like I can just tell them and then they'll tell their whole team. So they'll know, they'll get the heads up ahead of it as well. We'll just see when this is going to go, because I think it's actually, well, we just punted it. So it's actually going to be 13:10. But as soon as we in the code base have put the feature flags in, we'll let them know.
I was wondering for the release post, I don't know if it makes sense at all, which is like throwing ideas. Is it worth having some sort of an alpha section or something where you list everything that you have under feature flags and stuff like that? So just to kind of showcase the things that are being released under feature flags. Because right now we do release them, we do add documentation, we do state how to enable, disable that, but that's not surfaced, as I understand, into the posts and stuff like that. So,
I think that's a
and
good
because
idea.
it's like become feature flag, it can be buggy and can be reverted then and so on. So maybe an alpha kind of heading or something like that. I don't know.
I'll take that feedback. I'm the release post shadow this release, and next week I'm the manager of the release post. So I'll take that feedback to Farnoosh and just see if she's thought about grouping up under feature flags. I'm not sure how many other teams are doing it, but I think that's a really good idea if there is high volume, just to treat them like bugs almost in the list.
Are you, okay, I'm just trying to envision that. Are you envisioning like showing all the feature flags within the release posts and then kind of what functionality each of those enables? Is that what you're envisioning?
I think they would just pull out of the main list and get their own header, and probably they wouldn't be like a bulleted list just like bugs, but they'd have a little more description around them, because you have to say enable the feature flag and how to do it. But just to get them out of the main flow makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's a really good idea.
We'll see. I'll let that team know. Thanks for that. That's good feedback.
How is everyone doing?
Anyone here impacted by the weather?
Any Texans?
Yeah.
They're not here, that's why.
Oh, right.